Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on September 27th, 2024.
Our presentation today is going to be offered to us by Brad Forbush, and the title of his presentation is Cedar Mountain, Then and Now, and it explores visual materials, including illustrations and photographs from the period, and also highlights some of the preservation efforts that have been made, or memorialization efforts that have been made, beginning with the early veterans of the war and continuing to our present day. Brad has really fallen in love with the Cedar Mountain battlefield since he and his wife Susan came here in 2015. The battlefield is an interesting one. If you have yet to go out and visit it, much of it is wonderfully preserved, and it's a real opportunity to see one of our area battlefields. Brad's interest in the Civil War has been a 25-year affair. He has worked on researching the 13th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry that fought at, among other places, Cedar Mountain, Antietam, and at the Wilderness. And it's a developing project that Brad has been doing over all of these years. We hope that someday he might give us a picture of what the 13th did at the Battle of the Wilderness. But it's a long time project. It's one that continues, and it's a research project. I don't know, Brad. Do you think you'll ever actually finish it?
I am up to March 1864.
Okay. 2 more months. And we could be included. Well, good. That's wonderful. And Brad currently has a website, the 13th Massachusetts .org, and also a blogspot, the 13th Massachusetts.blogspot.com, where you can see the materials that he's been gathering. He has done extensive work on archiving materials sent from descendants of those the men who were involved in the 13th Massachusetts, and it is worth having an opportunity to look at those materials at either the website or the blog site. I'm going to let Brad begin, but I do want to say this too, that his professional background is as an animator in Hollywood, for television and for film. And when you look at these beautiful slides of his, you perhaps will appreciate more fully his own professional background. So I'm going to turn things over to Brad, and I hope I haven't said anything that he'll object to too much, and we'll let him introduce you to more about Cedar Mountain.
So, as he said properly, this is the title of my talk. A lot of people, skip over the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Sometimes it's overlooked. But I like the quote I heard sometime that if you're in a battle, no battle is small if you were in it. I think that was Frank Walker who said that. It was actually a very bloody engagement. And Ezra Carman, the historian of the Battle of Antietam, when he was doing statistics, figured out that in terms of the numbers of soldiers engaged in this 2-hour infantry fight, it's the 3rd bloodiest battle in the war. So these statistics for the dead are not the official reported statistics, were 314 Union and 229 Confederate. But Robert Crick extrapolated the number, and because of the fierceness of this battle, I would think these are accurate numbers. So it was a very bloody engagement. It was August 9th, 1862. Is anybody familiar with the battle? I'm not going to talk a lot. This isn't a campaign study, but I will touch on certain things that happened in the battle. Artist Edwin Forbes was there at the battle, and I'm going to be taking a look at some of his slides. This is one of his quotes. He said his first attempts at sketching a battle during the Shenandoah Valley campaign earlier that year were frustrated by heavy enemy fire. He said, this is a quote from his memoirs, "I was more fortunate on my second attempt at Slaughter or Cedar Mountain. The Reds kept well under cover but showed several battle flags along the edge of the distant wood. Nothing to alarm a spectator took place until early in the afternoon, when I was suddenly startled by a rattle of musketry in front." Sorry. Oops. So, here's what he said. This is a drawing, of course, Joseph Knapp's battery in action. And Forbes wrote, "I ran towards my horse, which was tied to a fence nearby, and I hastily mounting rode forward to the crest of the ridge on which Knapp's battery was posted, and I halted near it. In their center I could see with the aid of a glass several batteries advancing and firing, and I knew their practice was good, as their shells burst over our heads and in rear of our position too often for comfort." Now, I love looking at these drawings, and I was really surprised when I went out and I found the hill where, I know where Knapp's battery was posted, and the contours of this drawing match exactly the contours of the landscape. So if you're familiar with the ground, the landscape in these drawings is just spectacular. Even on the right of the image where you can't see it, the ground drops off. It's just the way he portrayed it in the sketch. So I would say this sketch is very accurate. This is a battlefield panoramic that the artist did of Cedar Mountain, and it accurately depicts a lot of the events that happened on the field. I've highlighted his key numbers so you could see them, but these are where he placed his numbers, and this is his key to the battle. One of the things I want to point out is these, well, it's in the next slide. What happened is on August 8th, one brigade of Union infantry advanced to the base of Cedar Mountain. They came there to support the cavalry of George Bayard, who was screening Jackson's march up from Orange towards Culpeper. And Bayard's cavalry was acting very much like Buford's cavalry at Gettysburg at this time. So Crawford's brigade was there the night before the battle, and these regiments fought in a significant part of that fight. Knapp's battery was with them, and also Jacob Romer's New York battery. This is the same sketch with my interpretation added. Now, Forbes himself wrote some notes that I've extrapolated some more information. I want you to notice where he says, Prince, in the center of the drawing, Prince's men lying in a cornfield is what he wrote. Well, we happen to know, I figured this out. Those are the regulars of the 8th and 12th U.S. Infantry Battalion that were sent out into the cornfield during a 2-hour artillery duel to act as skirmishers. So he's got them noted on the sketch. So the other thing I want to say on the morning of August 9th, General Banks was ordered with the rest of his corps down to Cedar Mountain, where his advanced brigade had been. And his orders were verbal, and General Banks said that he had the authority to attack. His commanding officer, General Pope, would have disagreed with that and said he was supposed to take up a defensive position. When General Banks arrived in about noon, he saw enemy batteries in the distance. There was a brief exchange around 2 o'clock, and from there the battery started maneuvering into position. The infantry was concealed in woods, the Confederate infantry. So Banks only saw batteries, and he had an axe to grind with Jackson for getting kicked out of the Shenandoah Valley, the previous spring, and he decides to attack. So I'm going to take a look at this drawing in 3 different detail shots. Forbes has indicated the slaughterhouse on the mountain, even if it's just a little scribble, and it's actually kind of accurate where he's placed the farm buildings. This is a photograph of the house. Today on that site, is there any way to stop this echo? On this site, there's a house built over the exact foundation, and it's like a hunting lodge, but it's built in the same spot as the Reverend Slaughter's house. This is the left sketch detail. I meant to say, Joseph Latimer, 19 years old, brought his battery up to the ledge of Cedar Mountain. They had to push the guns up this mountain. It took a while, and it was extremely hot during the day, so Latimer rode ahead, and he measured the distances to the enemy artillery, and he cut fuses, so when his guns arrived, he'd be ready to start. And he actually launched into the enemy right away when the guns got there. We call that spot the shelf, and it's an elevated position that commanded the whole battlefield. It's private property today. I have been able to go up there a few times. We know the property owners. So what we have here, Forbes has depicted the left of the Union line, McGilvery's Battery. The Hudson House is the Robert Hudson House. I understand it was Widow Hudson who was living there, so there were 3 Hudsons in the area, so Robert Hudson must have been gone by then. And Forbes says one of the buildings there was used as a signal station. He's got a little flagman on the chimney of that cabin. We have General George S. Green's small brigade of 2 regiments, which did anchor the left of the Union line, and Forbes has them double-clicking over there. The Confederates that were indicated on the side of the mountain marching down, that would be Isaac Trimble's brigade. Ewell had 2 or 3 brigades with him on the mountain, and they couldn't get involved in the infantry fight at all. And so Trimble was anxious to do something, so he came down the mountain and tried to flank McGilvery's position. He ran into some obstacles, but that's what's pictured here. And I also want to show, it looks like Forbes has indicated the Brandt House, which that's the location where it was. We don't really have a good picture of the Brandt House, but the Brandt farm was there, and he put it in, and that's the accurate spot too. That's a photograph of the Hudson House. After the day of the battle, General Pope moved his headquarters to this house. So this is the right side of the sketch, and this is why General Banks' attack nearly succeeded. Now Forbes has indicated all of this line of Union infantry as Crawford's brigade. He's got the road there, which is a really windy road in 1862, and traces of it are still there. Crawford was actually on the right side of the road, and General Geary had a brigade of 4 Ohio regiments, and they would have been on the left side of the road. These attacks were not coordinated. They came in at different times, so you wouldn't have had a continuous line like this. But what happened is Crawford's brigade went through the wheat field and it overlapped Garnett's brigade on the Confederate left just before reinforcements that were sent to that part of the line arrived. So they were able to surround Garnett's brigade and break through to the road. The entire left of Jackson's line collapsed. So Banks had a near victory. And it was only 3 regiments that did this. So those are some of the observations. The Newman cabin we'll see later. I think he's even indicated the well. I'm not certain to the cabin. You'll see that in the photograph. And one thing we have General Banks. I blew up his scribbles for General Banks at his command post. So you can see how he indicated that, just to make it a little easier to see. And what I really like about this is you can see the corner of the woods where the Crittenden Gate was in this drawing. I've been on the field a lot, and sometimes when you see this line of trees, it looks like a straight line of trees. But what I really appreciate is he's captured that corner of woods in the drawing. And that's what it looks like. So, this sketch is titled Charge of Union Troops on the Left Flank of the Army Commanded by General Stonewall Jackson at Cedar Mountain. I think that this is a dramatic representation. I'm not really sure where this took place. It could be interpreted as the Newman cabin, which you'll see again later. And if that's the correct interpretation, this would be Tolliver's brigade, and these may be either men of Crawford or the Ohioans attacking. But I asked Michael Block, the author of a recent book on Cedar Mountain, The Carnage Was Fearful, what his opinion of this sketch was. And he thought it was a cabin that's mentioned in some of the regimental histories. I remember reading about it. He thought it was off modern Dove Hill Road. It wouldn't have shown up in the panoramic sketch. It's between 2 ridges. And he said if that's the case, then these Confederates in front of it would not have been in front of it fighting. They would have been on the rising ground at the edge of a wood behind it. So in any case, not really sure where this took place. I love this drawing, but it is more of a dramatic presentation of what happened. This is why Crawford's attack was so successful. They were heading, I spelled temporarily wrong, please don't notice that. This was one of their targets. It was Pogue's Rock Bridge Artillery. We have some replica cannon on the site. And when they wrapped around Garnett's brigade, they captured this cannon. A soldier named Adjutant Sprout of the 28th New York was killed here. And I'll be talking about him a little later. When they got here, there was no infantry from here to where Tolliver's line begins. There were batteries, but at this time they were being withdrawn back into the woods. And I have also indicated the site of the Newman cabin. So because there were no infantry there, the guys who made it to the road were able to fire into the rear and flank of Tolliver's line, and Tolliver's line collapsed and ran back into the woods briefly. And then Early's command collapsed, part of Early's command collapsed because these Union guys were behind them now and firing into the rear. So that's a little bit of the story of the battle. This is the last Forbes sketch I have I'm going to talk about. This is called Night at the Hospital. McDowell's Corps arriving on the battlefield. He says it's 10 o'clock at night. That's a hospital in the rear of the field. The artillery fight is in the distance. General McDowell's Corps arriving. Now, because of the location of this sketch, we know that this is Colvin's Tavern, which is mentioned in the accounts of the inventory. That's actually Ricketts' division of McDowell's Corps. My great-great-grandfather is represented in that line of men arriving under the field. What I want to point out, he has number 4 labeled as Thompson's Battery. Number 3 is Pegram's Battery, which advanced during the Confederate counterattack after Banks was routed from the initial field. So Pegram went forward at night, and it was Thompson's Battery that silenced Pegram. But Thompson actually changed position. But he's also indicated the Now House there, number 7. So I'm going to just show you how accurate this landscape is. Here's my interpretation. Now, these batteries were all there, Hall's, Leppian, and Matthews. But I don't know if that's where they were positioned. I know Hall and Leppian were in front of the Now House. I don't know the distances. I'm sorry?
I hope that's better.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
But where Thompson fired point blank into Pegram, he moved to the left side of the road. Here's the trajectory of the sketch. Now, this is a Google screen grab, and it has wanky perspective. It flattens out all the houses, and it's warped. But you can see where the Now House is. You can see where the Union batteries are, where he placed them, and there were batteries there. And I marked where Thompson's battery was. The white dot represents the Old Orange Turnpike. Parts of it, this part of it is still extant. You can still drive this. And that's where Pegram's battery is. That's the Now House. This was Pope's initial headquarters the night of the battle. He moved because this was a hospital and there were too many wounded and dying people at the house. So he later moved his headquarters to the Hudson House on the other end of the battlefield. I've heard this is for sale if anybody's interested. I'm not sure if it's true. And this is the actual photograph of where Pegram was and where Thompson's battery was. So the point of all these drawings, I discussed with Bob O'Neill, another historian I really respect. He wrote Small But Important Riots, and Forbes did a sketch at Aldi. And we were just talking about, his work overall and the accuracy. And although he did a lot of dramatic depictions of things, we just said, he did a tremendous service. It's very hard to sketch these things along without being fired at. But I like what Bob said. He said, he did a tremendous service for his readers, some of whom may have lost loved ones in the scenes depicted, as well as for us researchers today. He gave us a visual record of events placed in accurate settings. So I was writing to him about these inaccuracies, and I think he took me long. I love these sketches. I look at them and consult them all the time. They're a great record of things that go on, and I don't think enough people look at them. Also, I'd point out, just as parting, that the engravings are different than the actual sketches. The engraver would sometimes change the drawing. So keep Pegram in mind. I'm going to talk about photographs now. A few days after the battle, Timothy O'Sullivan came down and photographed things. This might have been one of the first things he photographed on the battlefield. Bodies of horses on the battlefield. This is the first published wartime photo of anything dead. He was working for Matthew Grady. He took the only photographs of the battle aftermath. He helped usher in the era of documentary photography, first at Cedar Mountain and then at Antietam. the following month when the first photos of dead soldiers on an American battlefield were seen by the public. At Pegram's Battery, the commanding officer reported 7 men killed in his brigade. At least 2 of them were in Pegram's Battery. Pegram had 4 guns on his knoll in the nighttime fight. He was replied to by 3 batteries of the enemy. It was Thompson's battery that fired directly into him and silenced his battery. And General Williams counted 20 dead horses and several dead men around the wreckage of the battery. The body of one lieutenant was decapitated. This was a popular spot for Union soldiers to come and see when the fighting subsided. So I have a quote here from Austin Stearns in the 13th Massachusetts. He said he counted 10 dead horses and other soldiers counted 10 or 11 dead horses. So I was taking, 3 weeks ago, I was taking a descendant of Pegram's Battery around the battlefield, and her descendant, Albert Jenkins, is actually identified as a driver in this battery. And when I showed her this picture, she said, could he have been riding one of those horses? And I said, well, that's actually not out of the realm of possibility. He was wounded earlier in the fight, so he didn't come to Pegram's Knoll, which was later. So it's kind of interesting how that intersects with today. This is the Crittenden Lane. There's the Newman cabin, and there's the well. The capped well is still there today. It's 60 feet deep and lined with stone all the way down. This is the same location. The owner of the property covers up the capped well sometimes so you can't see it. The Newman cabin stood where those evergreen trees are. This is a close-up. Now I want to point out I cleaned all these up in Photoshop and I've worked with the contrast to get a really clear image. You really get a beautiful image with these photographs if you work at it. So what I want to point out is in the center. Well, first, it's a 2-lane farm road. This is the Crittenden Lane. It's a 2-lane farm road, which is pretty substantial, I think, for a farm lane. There's the photographer's wagon in the middle of the lane. And what we noticed, Michael Block actually noticed in this photograph, is the fence is still up from the cabin to the corner of the woods in the distance, which it indicates that there wasn't any infantry on this part of the field, like we said. They would have taken the fences down. I do know the 10th Virginia was lying in the woods around here getting shelled during the artillery duel. They were pulled out of line to support the Confederate left during the battle. So this could have been why there was such a gap in the line here. This photo is titled Union Graves on the Battlefield, Cedar Mountain, Virginia. These are officers of the 10th Maine. O'Sullivan is standing with them, second from left. I want you to, these guys are standing among their comrades that died during the battle a few days earlier, the graves. I want you to notice the it looks like 2 trees, it's 3 in the center of the photo in the background there. We're going to be coming back to those 2 trees. This is the same general area today. I think the Maine boys were standing farther back in the field in the low ground. But just to give you an idea of where these things were taken. This is very close to the 10th Maine Monument. That's a tour I led a few years ago. These officers are standing in the wheat field. The 10th Maine brought 435 enlisted men into the fight. They lost 179. 3 officers killed and 36 enlisted men. 4 officers wounded, and 130 enlisted men. They had 6 men taken prisoner. So this is a very bloody fight. And Nick Pacherno of Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation, I think it's remarkable. He's identified all these men. He has a huge collection on the 10th Maine, and he's just very passionate about this regiment and these men. So I just think it's great that we know who they are. This is titled Cedar Mountain Battlefield Viewed from the West. One of the crazy things about this battle is the cardinal points are all mixed up because the orientation of the 2 lines was basically east and west, with roads running north and south that were the axis of the battlefield lines. So when you say east, west, north, when you read this and you're interpreting these, it gets very confusing. I would say, for instance, that this is actually looking north, but I've always wondered where this photo was taken. I didn't know. It's not on the preserved part of the field that I can walk every day. And I had a hunch of where it was taken. Here's a close-up of it. I've lined it up so you can see some of the incredible detail you can see in this photo. We're looking towards the wheat field. And I want you to notice the dip in the ground behind the 2 soldiers' heads. So I had a hunch this was on the Inskip farm in front of their farm offices. I got permission to go there one time. A couple times Michael Block and I were exploring part of the battlefield over there. So I wanted to find a trajectory that looked like this photograph. So while we were there at the end of a tour doing something else, I was trying to get my shot, and a tiny farm dog came out and started barking at Michael and chasing him around the front yard. And I was walking around looking for the right angle to take this photo. And after a short while, Michael said, "We've got to go, he's trying to bite me." So in a hurry, I grabbed this shot, and he's holding the photograph there. And I thought I did a pretty good job. I was really pleased with this. I thought the landscape matched up. And then I saw this. This was, I think, recently posted by the American Battlefield Trust. And I think they're correct in that those trees in the background match the trees in the photograph that I'm discussing. Now, their modern day photo is low res. I don't know really where they took it, and I can't really see the same ground contours that I saw in my photograph. But I have an idea. In terms of where these were taken, I would just guess that, there's parallel ridges where the ground is rolling. I think it's the next ridge over from where I took my view. So it should be very similar because we're looking off into the distance. And now I have a new place that I want to go and walk around and try to find a spot for my own edification. So, I'm going to talk about monuments now, moving right along. Very eclectic talk here. I have some quotes for you about Judge Grimsley. He was a prominent citizen of Culpeper. He was a veteran of the 6th Virginia Cavalry. This is from the Richmond Dispatch, July 14th and July 28th, 1901. The Board of Supervisors of Culpeper County have appropriated a small sum for the purpose of making the lines of contending armies in the battles of the Civil War fought on Culpeper soil. The plan is to erect suitable granite stones or blocks at the position occupied by the brigades, regiments, and batteries of artillery engaged, and at other spots where the chief incidents of the battle occurred. These blocks of stone will be numbered in consecutive order. And they added naturally, the supervisors have made an appropriation, but it is not near enough to meet the demands of the undertaking. A contribution of $4 or $5 would be sufficient to purchase a stone. So, they didn't give him enough money, and he had to raise the money to carry out this plan. He decided to begin with Cedar Mountain. And that's to see if you're all still with me. It's a slideshow and it's dark. Cedar Run Baptist Church. I have some more quotes. On August 9th, 1901, over 1,000 people were at Cedar Run Baptist Church. The ladies of the neighborhood had a magnificent dinner. Quite a delegation of the old veterans of the federal forces came up from Washington City. They were royally entertained and enjoyed themselves hugely. They journeyed all over this interesting field, fighting the battle over again, and in the cool and shady grove of Cedar Run Church. So picture 1,000 people here. The next year, in 1902, they did it again. This time they had 7,000 people. And the occasion was the dedication of the 1902 dedication of the 28th New York Monument in the Culpeper National Cemetery. So, this is from the Richmond Dispatch, August 10th, 1902. At 8 o'clock this morning, every available vehicle in this vicinity was in active service. The survivors of the 28th New York Regiment were early on the grounds. They located the position of their regiment as it made the fatal charge across the wheat field, leaving every one of its line officers and 60% of its soldiers either dead or mortally wounded. Again, the ladies of the region prepared dinner for the veterans and sat them at tables. Together, the blue on one side, the gray on the other. 28th New York was one of the regiments with the 5th Virginia who captured their flag at Cedar Mountain that initiated the early blue-gray reunions. What we have here is the son of a captain in the 28th New York. His father was deceased, but he had been hearing these stories growing up, and he wanted to go and attend the dedication. He says he bought a camera, and he went to the event, and the camera was either very bad, or he was a very bad photographer. So the descendants of this family shared this folder with me with the images, and I worked very hard to get some kind of image out of these photographs. So these are heavily worked over in Photoshop. But what you see is Captain Brown seated in the center at the dedication of the monument in the cemetery. A carriage and four, as it was described. He said in the journal, anything that could move was utilized to get people to the church. I think here in the bottom left, you can see the church in the background, and you can see some ladies in white dresses in front of the church. And that's why that's there. This gentleman he photographed with his son is supposed to be the color bearer of 5th Virginia. And then there's just an image he took of the battlefield. That same year, a couple months later, Judge Grimsley was at it again when Theodore Roosevelt visited the battlefield. Again, I have a quote from the Richmond Dispatch. November 4th, 1902. The President passed several hours yesterday afternoon on the battlefield of Cedar Mountain. The President, a cavalryman himself, was interested particularly in the account of the famous cavalry charge made during the Battle of Cedar Mountain. In the very heart of the battlefield, after Judge Grimsley had described the battle, the President received informally those who had assembled on the field. During the reception, the President was photographed by Mrs. Frances Bodie of Culpeper. Subsequently, the President was given a shell which had been dug up on the battlefield as a memento of his visit. So there we have Judge Grimsley, second from right. And these are the markers on the battlefield. If you visit today, you'll see some of them on preserved ground, some of them in their original positions. Some of them have been moved because when farming became mechanized, these markers, these stone markers, became a bother, whereas a horse could go around it, machinery couldn't, and the farmers asked the Culpeper supervisors, what do we do about these stones? And they said, well, you can move them somewhere out of the way if they're in the way. So they were moved sometimes to a tree line, somewhere just out of the way. And these all happen to be on preserved land. These three markers are where the Hudson House was. This is the location of the Hudson House today. And these three markers are still there. I got to go there for the first time last year. So we have Prince's Brigade marker, McGilvery's 6th Maine Battery, and Green's Brigade, all on the left as a Union line, right where they should be, because the line was anchored here. That's Michael Block and myself. We went in search of the 5th Ohio marker, which we knew was on private property. Now, others knew where this was, but we didn't, and we wanted to see it and find it. So we got permission from the Inskips, who told us where to look, and we went out and discovered it. And what's really great about this is it shows us something about the battle. That's about as far as the 5th Ohio advanced. This marker is probably in its original position. What happened as the Ohio Brigade advanced, they had enemy firing in their front, and what happened is the 21st and 48th Virginia of Garnett's brigade came out of the woods to the road and fired directly on their flank and stopped them in their tracks. So the first line of the Ohio Brigade was stopped. The 5th Ohio came up in the second line, and they got a little bit further. But that's as far as they got. So finding that was really great. It sort of helps us interpret what we thought the interpretation was. It's correct. There are 5 monuments on the battlefield to different regiments. We have here 3rd Wisconsin and the 10th Maine. Only one of these is on preserved property. Here we have 28th New York, 27th Indiana, 46th Pennsylvania. Each of the photographs above is significant to the people in front of the monument. That's Joe Mack at the 28th New York. He brought Adjutant Sprout's sword to the battlefield. The adjutant was killed at that battery I showed you a picture of earlier. At the time he died, he had an infant daughter. She came to the dedication of the monument in Culpeper in 1902 and sang to the veterans of both sides. In the middle we have, I think it's Mr. Bob Schaefer. His grandmother's uncle was 17-year-old Edmund Brown. The day of the battle was his 17th birthday in the 27th Indiana. He went on to write a marvelous history of the 27th Indiana Regiment. It's just so descriptive and it's beautiful, and we quote it a lot. And on the right, we have the McQuillan family who came out from California and Hawaii, a gentleman with his 2 sons, and their ancestor, Henry von Sende, was killed in the battle with the 46th Pennsylvania during their charge. They don't know which of the 2 gentlemen in the photograph is him, but he was the older man of the 2. I suspect it's the standing man, but it's anybody's guess. This monument was dedicated in 1926. It says that it marks the exact spot where General C.S. Winder was mortally wounded. McGilvery says that it was definitely his battery that fired the shot that wounded General Winder. So McGilvery was on the far left of the Union line, so he fired across the battlefield to the other corner and mortally wounded General Winder. Last thing I'm going to talk about very quickly is that Cedar Mountain is very much a part of the Culpeper National Cemetery. Established in 1867, we have monuments from the regiments engaged at Cedar Mountain. We have the 7th Ohio. The Pennsylvania Monument is for all Pennsylvania soldiers in Culpeper, Brandy Station, as well as Cedar Mountain. We have the 28th New York, which I talked about. We have the 10th Maine. All these regiments were hit very hard. And we have the 2nd Massachusetts, and the different dates of the monuments. Of course, the unknowns. The Union dead were exhumed after the war from the Battle of Cedar Mountain, and they were reinterred here, but none of them are identified. I think there's one soldier identified from Cedar Mountain in one of the Ohio regiments, buried next to his monument. And I tell people when we walk the field that the Confederate dead were never removed. Their remains are still there for the most part. There is one Confederate soldier who resides in the town of Gray, Maine. So, well, there's no information there, but we'll just go back. I don't know what happened there. There were some websites, but that's what I have for you. And thank you very much.
So, as always, we want to offer an opportunity to you to raise some questions for Brad, too.
How did he end up in Maine?
Oh, that's a great story. There was a soldier in the 10th Maine who died in Alexandria from his wounds. His name was Collie. I forget his first name. His family wanted his body shipped to Maine, and so a body was shipped to Maine. And the mother had the guts to open the coffin and look. And she said, "This is not my son." She said, "This is a Confederate." So she recontacted the authorities, and apparently they shipped the correct body up to Maine. The people of Maine buried the Confederate soldier with honors and gave the headstone the name The Stranger. And they put a Confederate flag up by the grave. So that's the story of the stranger.
Did they ever send the right one up there?
Yes, yeah, they did send, apparently they did, I think his name was George Colley, and they did send another body, and I guess she was satisfied that this was her son.
Brad, can you tell us more about Edwin Forbes, his drawings, and their use in the publications of the school?
Well, you can download them at the Library of Congress website. And again, I recommend the original drawings. You can see the works engraved in the reproductions of the newspapers. He wrote his memoirs 30 years after, and they're all black and white engravings. But I find it useful to look through occasionally. I think of the two artists I really know the best. Woad, A.R. Woad and Forbes. I think Woad wasn't quite the draftsman, but he was very accurate, and he was often out on the battlefield. Forbes did beautiful sketches. He would sometimes interview the soldiers and then try to depict a scene. And his depiction of the Haystacks fight at Aldi, he wasn't there, but he captured the landscape exactly. But he shows Confederate cavalry mounted, and at that particular engagement, they were dismounted, and their horses were in a ravine. So I still recommend them as a source. I'm not, I'm not an expert on his life, but I do have those sources, and I use them all the time. I hope that answers your question.
What was the strategic position of this battle?
Oh.
What were they trying to do, one or the other?
Well, that's come on our tour. No, at the time, Lincoln was fed up with the 3 Union commanders he had operating the Shenandoah Valley and around Washington, and he formed one army, put John Pope at the head of it, and Pope was trying to consolidate his army, and he was going to put pressure on Richmond coming from the west. So Lee, much as he did in the spring of 1862, detached Stonewall Jackson. This was Jackson's last independent command. And he said, see if you can do something to stop Pope's advance. And, it wasn't anything specific, just see if you can do any damage to Pope. Well, as Pope was trying to consolidate his army, which was spread out at Culpeper, Jackson started to march toward Culpeper. That was his objective. In his 2-day march to Cedar Mountain, he had the worst marching day of his life on August 8th. But he arrived at Cedar Mountain, and it was Banks' initiative to attack Jackson. And that's a big controversy. Banks was a politician. He was very concerned about his public image. He went in 1863 voluntarily to the Committee on the Conduct of the War just to testify about what happened at Cedar Mountain, because he was getting a lot of bad press. And he said, I had the authority to attack. Well, John Pope heard this, and he got very upset. So he gave his testimony, and you can read all this in the official records. So Pope says, there's no way I was going to attack with 1 corps when I was trying to consolidate my 3 corps. He was supposed to hold, and strategically that sounds correct. He was supposed to hold his position. But knowing John Pope, he could have said something like, send out your skirmishers and attack if you have to. Apparently Banks said, you can draw on Ricketts' division of 10,000 men if you need help. There's more to this story. I don't want to go on and on, but it was Banks' initiative to attack. And Jackson succeeded in his accomplishment. He destroyed Banks' corps at this battle. And they were taken out of action. They totally disrupted Pope's plans. And so strategically, Jackson met his objective.
And Pope stayed in combat the rest of the war?
Pope continued to operate in Culpeper County for the next 2 weeks. He retreated to the Rappahannock. Then there was Second Manassas, which was a disaster, in Chantilly. And so General Pope resigned, and he went out west for the rest of his career during the war, I believe. Yes?
Back to the Confederate casualties, are there, so they were buried on the battlefield.
Mhm.
Are there any markers or anything?
There's nothing left. A few months after the battle, we know where some of the graves were. I haven't done any forensic studies. It's something I'd like to try to have done. It's a state park now. But I think the graves are still where we know they were, was on private property. Where the heaviest fighting was and there was hand-to-hand combat, those were the last bodies to be buried. It was woods there. I don't quite know where they would have buried the bodies. It was farmed after. But just a few short months after the battle, the Confederates were again camped in that ground, and they said the wild animals had routed out the bodies. And they didn't go. General Ewell didn't go into a lot of detail. They tried to cover them up as best they could. I've discussed this with other people who came before me, historians, and they said, really, if there's anything left, it might be anything metallic. But basically, there's nothing. I've taken descendants of soldiers around, and I tell them their ancestors are here. Yes.
My father's father was in the 12th Maine from Calais. He was 79 when my father was born. He was under Butler.
And Butler?
I went to college near Gray. I know where
Oh, you know where Gray is. I've never been there.
And, quite a story.
Yeah.
But 12th was in Louisiana, Savannah, Cedar Creek.
Oh, right,
The
1864.
12th.
I understand that's why they called it Cedar Mountain. It used to be called Cedar Run, but it got confused with Cedar Creek later in the war, so it was referred to as Cedar.
The 10th and the 12th.
Oh, yeah.
Like Maine.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I graduated history degree
Thanks,
in 64 in Maine,
Clive.
near Gray.
Clive.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got to talk.
For a little while.
Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of questions.
Thank you so much, Tom, come on up and tell us who the lucky winner is.
A generous donation of several lithographs, and we have this one, and we got some people who've showed an interest, so would like, could you help me draw the winning ticket? Okay. So my glasses on, so just check the number. 365950. Okay, we have a winner. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
And we'd say that everybody who purchased tickets is a winner too, since you've helped us raise funds for our scholarship to the Battlefield Trust Seminar for the teachers. We also want to remind you that the 25th of next month will be upstairs this time, when John Cummins will address the question of preservation on the Spotsylvania battlefield. He's a photo researcher and historian who's done a great deal of looking to find areas of the Spotsylvania battlefield and then work hard to have them preserved. So in a way this echoes what Brad was talking about today too. And of course this is a wonderful way of finding out where the battlefields actually were, and in the cases where we have these open spaces yet that have not been purchased, making sure that they can be preserved. So anyway, thank you very much again for coming, and hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.